This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. This is Dan Newman. I'm joined, as always, by my Hello, Old Sports co-host, Andrew Newman. He's also my brother. And it is time for yet another episode of Hello, Old Sports. I think this is like episode 89 or 90 that we've done over the past 3.5 years. We are rapidly approaching the 100-episode mark. So we want to thank you all, especially those of you who have been with us from the very beginning. And like any fans of anything that you've been listening from the beginning, you have to tell everybody how it's not nearly as good as it used to be and all of that. So with that said, Andrew, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. With that, I have to say, I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's any better now. I think we can pretty much say we've pretty much kept it consistent. I don't think the shows at the beginning are really any worse than these shows, but I also don't think they're any better. I think we're pretty much, pretty consistent overall in terms of how good or not good we are at this, wherever that falls.
The one thing I would say is we've learned about, or I've learned about audio. So I think that it sounds better now because we've learned more about editing and cutting things out and, making sure the sound is right and everything. And my equipment is a little better and maybe we've learned to pace things a little better, but you're right. It's pretty much the same thing. And it's pretty much what it was for years beforehand when we would just randomly just start getting into a conversation about some esoteric sports history topic. So
that's true. Yes.
So tonight, I don't know if it's super esoteric. We've really kind of been all over the place recently. At the beginning of 2024, we did 2 episodes ago was a random team, the 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Super Bowl champion. The last episode, which actually just posted today, the same day that we're recording this, was about the great Mike King Kelly, one of the 19th century greatest baseball stars of the 19th century. And then we're back up into the more of the modern age tonight. We're back to the 1990s. And this is the second in a occasional series that Andrew thought of a couple of years ago where we try to talk about the dark years of a team. And that's either after a dynasty or in this case, between 2 dynasties. The first one we did of these was about the 1980s and early 90s Pittsburgh Steelers. And tonight we're going to talk to you about the Los Angeles Lakers of pretty much all of the 1990s.
Yeah. And I feel like as I was doing this last week or doing the preparation for it last week, we should just sort of right at the top address. This is the dark days for the Los Angeles Lakers. For most franchises, this would not be considered a particularly dark period. And for some franchises, it would be considered a boom period.
They missed the playoffs once during this whole time frame.
During the period we're going to talk about, they missed the playoffs once. There was a period for the Lakers where after this, where they actually missed the playoffs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a row in sort of the waning days of the Kobe Bryant Lakers, which would be its own possible topic. A, it's a little too recent. B, a lot of it would probably be somewhat critical of Kobe Bryant, so we should probably wait a little while on that. But yeah, the period we're going to talk about would not remarkably jump out at you as a really bad period for most teams. What it is an interesting period. And just for context, by the way, the 1 year they did not make the playoffs was only the first time in 18 years that they had not made the playoffs. And I believe only the 3rd season since they were in Los Angeles where the Lakers had missed the playoffs. So they're sort of a victim of their own lofty expectations in this situation.
And there was plenty to talk about even from that season. So, All right. So maybe we should just, and we're not going to go all the way back to Minneapolis here, but just sort of a little bit of a brief
Nobody
overview.
from Minneapolis wants to know you.
The Lakers, very successful team, didn't win many championships in the 60s, or any championships, but they were always right up there competing, often losing to the Boston Celtics. In 72, they finally win a world championship with Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West. Don't do much else in the 70s, although they do trade for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. In the mid-70s, they become sort of a perennial playoff team, but not a championship level team. Jerry West is the coach during those years in the late 70s. 79, they draft Johnson. They bring in Jack McKinney as head coach, and then McKinney suffers a bike riding injury mid-year. He's replaced by Paul Westhead, his assistant. They win the title in 80. Westhead gets fired during the 81-82 season. Pat Riley gets hired. Riley wins 4 more championships going up through the 88 season. 89 is Kareem's last year. They make it all the way back to the finals, lose in a 4-game sweep to the Detroit Pistons. And then one more year, Riley in 89-90. Riley leaves after that year. They make it back to the finals in the 90-91 season under the new coach, Mike Dunleavy. They win game 1 and then lose the next 4 to Jordan and the Bulls. It is Magic's last ever appearance in the finals. It is Michael Jordan's first ever appearance in the finals, a passing of the torch. And I think that's probably where we'd pick the story up.
Yeah, I think we should start probably a few years earlier.
Okay.
The first thing we should touch, so you look at the Lakers in 88, 89, and it's still the Lakers. It's the Showtime Lakers. Obviously, some bit players have or even more than bit players, but some sort of secondary characters have come and gone. But it's still the Magic, Kareem, Riley Lakers. They get swept in 89. Kareem retires, and that wasn't, he had announced he was retiring. He was, at that point, he was in the phase where he really looked like a turtle. He was certainly old enough to step aside. I guess so. That doesn't really even necessarily mean like, okay, that's the first step that's the first step in them looking different, but it's not the first step in really the dissolution of this, this team. As I'm looking at this, so Kareem, full disclosure, we just had a pause. Don't edit out the part where I said Kareem looked like a turtle at the end of his career.
Well, the one thing we've talked about too is that how Kareem would just not have worked anywhere else. Like, had he not been on those Lakers teams, he would have retired sometime around 1984 because you couldn't picture Kareem going to play in Milwaukee or New Jersey with his game at 38 years of age.
Those Denver teams that scored 178 points.
Exactly.
So Kareem leaves, but it's kind of like, okay, that had been coming. There was no reason to think, okay, this team, especially with the state of the Western Conference at the time. As I'm looking at this and I go, okay, so that was 88, 89. And I realized kind of surprisingly, when it gets to 89, 90, and I'm going, I really don't know anything about Pat Riley leaving the Lakers, like the reason for it, the story behind it. And when you think about this guy with the circumstances with which he became the coach in Los Angeles are very well known. Everything surrounding his Knicks tenure is very well known in terms of leaving the Knicks, getting hired by the Knicks, the whole Miami thing. I was like, I am surprised I don't know anything about this really. And then I looked and I realized that the reason is there's really not much there. He kind of just realizes that it's time for him to go, and he's burning himself out a little bit. And I'm sure he had his eye on potentially other opportunities, or at least thought about it, and maybe thought the team was headed downhill. But the quote that was in the press conference here said, "Fame can grab hold of you, but can manifest itself into a real personality change. I was starting to grow where I was in commercials and I was doing this thing and that. We were in the playoffs and I did a 4-hour interview trying to sell the book the night before a game. And Lakers owner Jerry Buss said there was no question he had changed, and I think more difficult. He and I were the best of friends when we were playing, and we used to do everything together. All his friends had changed. I hardly knew him. And it was almost like, this is my team. And the one thing you cannot do is place yourself, the owner, the players." That's not a complete quote, but there's got to be words missing there.
And who said that? Jerry West?
This is what it said. It said it was Jerry Buss. I don't know how much of that quote is accurate because I think there's stuff missing or whatever. But go ahead. Sorry.
But I just was wondering because one of the things it said was we were best friends when we were playing. And Jerry Buss never. One of the things, and there's two great books by Jeff Pearlman that I used for this episode. One is called Showtime, and it's about those 80s teams. And the other is called Three Ring Circus, which is about the Kobe and Shaq team. So sort of the bracketing of that era with those two great books by Jeff Pearlman. One of the things that Riley tended to think was that they were starting to tune him out. And that, and I talk about this all the time. It's just at a certain point, guys just want to hear a different voice. And Michael Cooper in that first, Jeff Pearlman says that shoot arounds turn from 40 minutes to 1 hour. He wasn't as open to suggestions. He was becoming more and more of a control freak. He was insisting on everybody sitting exactly where he wanted them to on the plane. Just sort of Gary Vitti, the Lakers trainer, said guys tired of Pat. His style is such that you can get burned out on it because he keeps tightening that bolt tighter and tighter. They do win 63 games, which was the second most that Riley had ever won. And this is mostly the old team. This is Magic and Cooper, Byron Scott. Then they've brought in different, Worthy, but then they've also brought in Orlando Woldridge, has been on the team a couple of years ago. They drafted Vlade Divac, and he is the starting center replacing Kareem. But they end up losing in the second round of the playoffs to the Phoenix Suns, the sort of up and coming Phoenix Suns. They lose to them 4-1. And then Riley decides he's going to take a year off. He's going to leave. I don't know if he explicitly knows it's a year at this point. Takes a year off, does TV, and then eventually goes to the Knicks. And after that, Miami. So yeah, after that first year, or after that, that first year without Kareem, one more year with Riley, and then he's gone. And just Magic is left of sort of the great triumvirate of those 80s Lakers dynasty.
He didn't start that first year, but they drafted Vlade Divac, who, you could argue is sort of, and this isn't really fair to him, but considering when he was drafted and who he replaced and when he was traded and who he was traded for, you can almost call this era of the Lakers the Vlade Divac era. There's another guy I more associate with this era who's going to come up later, but really Divac was there all of these middle years. But Riley leaves, and most of the articles do focus on that. I had the LA Times article from the time, and it says essentially it was a smooth transition or whatever. And I'm sure there was more behind the scenes, but for a coach that successful who won that many rings and was there that long and still wanted to coach, like he wasn't retiring because he was in his 80s and didn't want to coach anymore, it was almost as smooth of an exit as you could get. Would you agree with that given the circumstances?
It was a smooth exit. And then the bringing in Mike Dunleavy, who had not really been associated with the team as either a player or a coach. He'd been an assistant in Milwaukee. Bringing him in was sort of seamless as well, even though they were hiring somebody from outside. They weren't bringing in somebody from within the franchise. They weren't elevating somebody like they had done with Riley, like they had done with Westhead. They're bringing in a whole new guy to coach this sort of aging veteran team.
And it's kind of surprising with Dunleavy that he had played as recently as the year before. He was an assistant with the Bucks starting in 87, but he'd gotten into a couple of games in the last 2 years. He was an assistant with them, right? Yeah,
they got shorthanded and they just kind of, it was almost like a 19th century baseball type of thing. It was like, he's here. We just throw him in there. We need players.
Yeah. So, because at first I'm like, did he really? Because I was looking at his playing stats and I was like, did he really go right from being a player to coaching the Lakers? But no, he was mostly an assistant with the Bucks. But yeah, a little bit of a surprise that they don't.
And he's still a young guy. He's only 36, taking over this team.
but you would expect that it would be somebody from within the organization, just sort of in the absence of a team that's been this good this long. But I think what it also says is, they know there's an aging core there, but, think about how successful they've been for 9 years or not, really 11, 12 years since they drafted Magic and brought in Kareem. They probably thought, hey, and really the gap between when they were making the finals in the early 70s till they made the final, you know what I mean? They probably didn't have reason to think we're going to be down long. So they weren't thinking, hey, can we wring another title out of this aging team? It was, can we use this aging team to roll into our next core that's going to continue making finals appearances? So I'm guessing that's why they went with such an out of the box young coach from outside the organization instead of promoting an assistant.
And the other thing too is that we shouldn't overestimate some of this. I mean, yeah, Kareem's gone and Michael Cooper is actually Michael Cooper. That's his. Michael Cooper retires after Riley's last year. But Kareem's gone. But Byron Scott's only 29. Worthy's 29. AC Green is 27. Magic Johnson himself is only 31. And Magic Johnson had won. I think Magic Johnson won MVP in 90, 89, and 87. He's won 3 of the last 4 years before this Dunleavy year. I think sometimes Magic, for a couple reasons. First of all, I think because you compare him with Bird. And Bird's career was basically on its way to being over by about 87. Magic was just hitting his prime by 87. Second of all, in retrospect, we look back and we know what happened with Magic. You also know that starting in 91, it was all Jordan doing all the winning all the MVPs. And so I think sometimes it's hard to realize that going into this 90-91 season, Magic Johnson is very much in his prime. The guy's won 3 of the last 4 MVP awards.
And James Worthy's only 29.
Yeah.
And Byron Scott is 29. Divac's young. AC Green's in his 20s.
Yep.
Really the only guys on the team that are over 30 that play is Michael Thompson, and Magic Johnson's 31. Actually, yeah, Michael Thompson played a lot off the bench. But the other thing that's notable about the 90-91 team is they bring in Sam Perkins. He's sort of the big addition for that 90-91 team. And he had been in Dallas for 5 or 6 years. Those Dallas teams were not very good in that era. But they bring him in. He goes into the starting lineup. The starting lineup for the 90-91 team is Worthy, Magic, Perkins, Byron Scott, and Vlade Divac. I didn't go in position order there, but those are really your 5 starters.
And they have a good year. 58-24, third in the conference, and they beat Houston, they beat Golden State, they beat Portland 3-0, 4-1, 4-2. And then, like I mentioned, in 91, in the NBA Finals, they win the first game against Jordan's Bulls in the close game that goes down to the very end, and they win it 93-91. And then they sort of kind of falls apart from there. They lose game 2, 107-86. I think that game 2, and I'll check that. I think that's the game where Jordan goes nuts and hits all the 3-pointers. Where is oh no, it's not that one actually. It's which game is that? Maybe that's game 3, is that Jordan goes game
nuts? 3, he's got 29.
Oh no, that's the following year. I'm sorry. That's 92, because he makes the gesture on the sidelines to Magic, who's doing the game. That's the following year. That's not this year. But even so yeah, Jordan takes over and gets over the whatever opening night jitters he had in his first ever NBA Finals. They win. The Lakers lose. And now we're going into the 91-92 season, and there's obviously a lot going on there. But anything else on 90-91 before we kind of turn the page?
No, I think it's, it's not the team they were a couple of years ago. They've now, and I mean, you can look back and say it was obvious what the 91 Bulls were the start of, but it wasn't super obvious at the time. it wasn't apparent they were going to win 6 championships in 8 years and that, who knows what would happen in the middle. But the Lakers have now been pretty thoroughly beaten 8-1 total in the last 2 finals they've got into in the last 3 years. Riley's gone, Kareem is gone. They're still probably considered the lead dogs in the Western Conference. Because I mean, again, who's even made finals as of 1991 recently besides them? You have the Blazers in 90, and then you got to go back to 86 with the Rockets. And I would bet by 91, that's a pretty different team than the team that made the finals in 86 for the Rockets. So, there's no reason to think they're probably not still going to be the favorites for the foreseeable future, at least in the Western Conference, even if the balance has now shifted to, Detroit and especially Chicago in the Eastern Conference.
Exactly.
Now, before we get to the big news, I was going to say, was there any other significant player movement going into the 91-92 season?
No, it's still basically the same team that had gone to the finals. AC Green, Scott, Perkins, Eldon Campbell had been on the team the year before. Vlade, obviously. It's they had brought in Rory Sparrow, and actually they have that's not the same Cliff Robinson. That's not the Cliff Robinson that was on Portland. That's a different Cliff Robinson. So yeah, it's basically the same team, and they're going into this 91-92 season, I think, probably expecting to be a veteran team that is, as they had been, and Magic had been only second in MVP voting the year before, so he's still very much in his prime. And I think they're expecting to be the same team. And then in early November of 1991, the world falls apart a little bit for that one day.
Yeah, so the last couple of preseason games, and he had played in a few preseason games that year. The last couple of preseason games, Magic Johnson sits, and the reason that's given is, first, the reason is that he's got the flu. And then when that no longer really becomes plausible as the regular season starts and he misses the first 3 games of the regular season, the reason given is, well, the flu wiped him out. He's dehydrated. He's got to get his strength back a little. And this is all too...
It doesn't change anything, but I can verify that he was sick for a little while.
So eventually, okay, this is all the Lakers trying to essentially figure out what the hell they're going to do, how they're going to announce this, what does it mean? And then that leads to, what is it, November 8th is the article I have here. So
it happened on the afternoon of the 7th.
7th. Okay, so I have the article from the Washington Post from the next day, where Magic Johnson at the Great Western Forum, where I guess pretty much a year ago to the day he'd accepted his MVP award, announces that he has the HIV virus. And this is another one of those where it's almost become like, do we really need to get deep into this? Everybody knows the story already.
Yeah.
I think it's important to discuss, and I think I might be just the right age for this, because I was born in 86. I remember when this happened. I don't think I watched the press conference specifically. I don't know if I knew what a press conference was. I was 5. But when you heard somebody had AIDS back then, and AIDS and HIV being basically considered the same thing, some of these articles that I found from then says Magic Johnson has AIDS virus.
Mm-hmm.
And these aren't, this is news articles that ran at the time. This was seen as like, well, he's probably going to die very soon. Like he's probably going to be dead almost immediately. And, people just sort of the hysteria over it. It was seen primarily as a thing that promiscuous homosexuals got.
Men.
Promiscuous homosexual men. And it turns out Magic Johnson was 2 of those 3 things. But we're obviously going to talk about this from the impact on the Lakers. The cultural impact of it cannot be overstated. But hard to imagine a more dramatic a guy at the top of his game, still probably the second best player in the NBA, second biggest star in the NBA without a doubt, announcing he's got this disease or virus that's regarded to a lot of people as, well, this is a death sentence. So his basketball career is over. People think his life is going to be over. And that's, that's obviously sort of the main dramatic incident that precipitates everything that happens with the Lakers the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Something that would not happen in the modern era, in the post-internet era. First of all, let's just say that, this leaves the Lakers from a basketball point of view with really sort of a hole, because this is November 7th. You don't have time to do anything. This is a team that had finished in the made it to the NBA Finals the year before, so it's not like they had a high draft pick. It's not like they had made a big free agent signing. I mean, think about what happens, especially in the modern NBA or really in any sport. It's like the Jets this year with Aaron Rodgers. It's like you realize that when you've been building all around this one guy and that person then is not there, that makes a big difference. So they kind of muddle through with Byron Scott, James Worthy, Sam Perkins. I'm guessing Worthy is the lead. Yeah, Worthy's the leading scorer at 19.9. Perkins and Sedale Threet both over 15. They do make it to the playoffs at a 43-9 record. 1-3. They lose 3-1 to Portland. Portland, who ends up going all the way to the NBA Finals against the Bulls. And so they're sort of stagnant. Now, there's a few big Magic moments throughout the course of the year, and that's what I was just beginning to talk about, is that this is something that wouldn't happen in the modern era because everything is internet and, it's just different. The All-Star ballots had been printed and brought to the stadiums and wherever else they are before Magic's announcement. So when people go to games or they pick up All-Star ballots, they vote for Magic Johnson, even though he has not been playing in the NBA all year. There's questions about this. There's questions, first of all, about the fairness of it, about whether he, deserves to be an All-Star for a season he's not even playing in. There's questions about the safety, about whether somebody with HIV should be, knowingly has HIV, should be out on the court. They eventually decide that, number one, yes, they are comfortable with it from a safety point of view. Number two, they give the West 13 All-Stars for that year so that nobody is losing a slot. Magic plays in the game. He starts. He scores a bunch of points. He hits a bunch of three-pointers. He wins MVP. Also, he'd been to the Olympic team back before his announcement. He'd been named to this 92 Olympic Dream Team that everybody was so excited about. I'm assuming that it wasn't until after the All-Star game that he made it official that he was going to play on that team. But then he goes and does that. And so then all of a sudden there's this talk, maybe Magic Johnson should come back and play for the Lakers in 92.
And this article I have here from the day after the Washington Post article at the press conference, there's a lot of different quotes in here about the thing or whatever, but sort of on the subject you just made, there's a throwaway line towards the end of the article. It said, Johnson said what he will miss most of the camaraderie of players, said he will still continue playing one-on-one games with Abdul-Jabbar and others. He also said he had close friends in the league, including fellow stars Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, and Isaiah Thomas, former Lakers coach Pat Riley. Thomas, the star guard of the Detroit Pistons, is the most likely replacement for Johnson on the 1992 U.S. Olympic team that will play in Barcelona next summer. So
Thomas was the least likely replacement for Johnson on that dream team, because Bird, Pippen, and Jordan would not have been on the team if Isaiah Thomas was on it. And also, it's so much so, and this is a little bit of a digression, but when John Stockton got hurt during those 92 Olympics, Chuck Daly, who was the Pistons coach and Isaiah's coach, and he was also the coach of the Dream Team, didn't bring in a replacement for John Stockton, even though John Stockton was injured, because the two guys he most wanted to have were Isaiah, and he knew that wouldn't be stomached, and Joe Dumars, who was Isaiah's teammate. And he knew that if he brought in Dumars, that Isaiah would be so angry with him that it would hurt him as Isaiah's coach going forward. So, yeah, then that's a story for a different day. But Isaiah Thomas was not in any way ever going to be a replacement for anybody on the Dream Team. Guaranteed.
Yes. So we covered the 91-92's team, almost any team when you forget about the circumstances, whatever. If Magic Johnson had blown his knee out in the third to last preseason game and not played, any team, that team just taking Magic Johnson away from it was going to have a precipitous drop off that season. And then when you factor in the way it happened, why it happened, the lingering I'm sure they were getting questions about it all year. And, to some of the guys like Worthy and, guys who've been teammates of his for a long time, I'm sure weighed heavy on them. They were sort of behind the eight ball from the beginning of the season. That's also it for Mike Dunleavy after just 2 seasons. He was not fired. He left to become the coach of the Milwaukee Bucks for, I believe he just left for more money. Is that right?
More money, and it was also an 8-year contract. He had been an assistant with the Bucks. That was the team he had played for, suited up for when they needed him. I didn't see a lot about this in my research. The contemporaneous news accounts didn't really have a ton about it, but I think he probably, first of all, he retired, I think, before he knew Magic was going to try and come back. By this point, you would be accurate in maybe looking at them as an aging team. And I think he just wanted the job security. He thought that the best days were over in LA and that he was going to go somewhere else. And in retrospect, he probably was right. But to leave the Lakers, the vaunted LA Lakers, to go to the Milwaukee Bucks was a surprising decision at the time.
So the new coach is Randy Pfund, P-F-U-N-D. I'm guessing the P is silent on that. He had been an assistant with them since the 80s, since 85.
And when they hired Dunleavy, Riley had specifically asked Dunleavy to keep Pfund on as an assistant.
Okay. So they bring him in, or he moves up to the head coaching spot. Like you said, and we should probably talk about now, the off-season, preseason of 92, after having played in the All-Star game, after having played on the Olympic team, and also not to be, put too fine a point on this, but no, he didn't wither away and die because he contracted HIV. Magic Johnson starts to think, I can make a comeback, and he starts actually playing in some preseason games
with the intention of playing for the Lakers in the 92-93 season.
And this is one I'd always heard this is the first time I think I read an article about it. I just sort of heard stories about it. They're playing an exhibition game and he gets cut on the arm. And there's sort of a reaction from players, which it's easy now to criticize them as bigoted and closed-minded, and some of them may have been. What I will liken this to, and maybe regret it, but in March of 2020, if you heard you were in the room with somebody and the next day they found out they had COVID, you were a lot more concerned about that than you might have been 2 or 3 years later. This, you're playing a basketball game with a guy you know is tested positive for HIV and he's cut. It's easy to look back critically with 2024 eyes at guys who freaked out. And again, it's not like 1992 wasn't 1982 when it comes to HIV. People should have known a little something, but the reaction was fairly predictable, if not justified, shall we say.
And some high-profile guys had been talking about how nervous they were. Karl Malone. They're playing Cleveland in this game, and Mark Price, who hadn't said anything previously after the game, talks about how nervous it makes him. Yeah, it was a different world, and the stakes were high. And these guys reacted, I think, in a very human way. And so Magic decided that he can't do it, and he's got to bow out. And that's what he does.
I said, I just felt all the controversy, people saying different things, not people outside of the NBA, but people within the NBA. I just felt it was going to be like this all year. And so it wasn't worth it because I played basketball for two reasons: the love of the game and to have fun. I have fun doing it. I was seeing the fun part wasn't going to be there, and it wasn't worth playing then if I wasn't going to have any fun and enjoy it. And Karl Malone, unfortunately, was not, the most, and most of the things in his last 30 years of life have not indicated this was in any way an outlier or an aberration for him. Was not the most enlightened guy about it, but there were people who shared those concerns. So
for the second year in a row, they're left with a team that they think is going to be led and center around Magic Johnson that is not. And it's kind of the same cast of characters: Threet, Green, Perkins, Divac, Scott, James Worthy, and I think James Worthy in his last season. Let me just verify that, but I think 92-93 is Worthy's last season. Oh no, he actually sticks around one more year. He's there in the 93-94 season also. So it's all those guys. They finish with a 39-43 record. It's their first losing season at home in something like 20 some odd years, and they make it to the playoffs. They actually managed to limp into the playoffs. And the crazy thing is, they're an 8 seed. They go up against Phoenix, this is Barkley's first year in Phoenix. Barkley's they're a 1 seed, and the Lakers win 2 games in Phoenix to go up 2-0 and really scare the hell out of this incredible Phoenix team that had the best record in the league.
I remember a lot about this series.
You were big into the Lakers, weren't you?
I liked this Laker team. I think I had a coat. I was 7, but I remember a lot about this series. I remember a lot about that day, that game 5, because I remember they were up 2-0. And again, I was not staying up till 10:30 and watching these games, but I remember they were up 2-0 and they lost the next 2. And in game 5, I knew we had been coming from somewhere. And I look at this, and it was Sunday, May the 9th. So I think it was Mother's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been Mother's Day. And I want to say we were at either our grandparents or our aunt and uncles. And I remember I think we were listening to it on the radio. For some reason, I remember that. But right at the end of regulation, I think James Worthy had a chance to make a layup to probably win the game and couldn't make it. And then it went to overtime. So after they're up 2-0, they lose games 3 and 4 back in LA. And then they lose, they take game 5 to overtime and get beat solidly in overtime. They end up losing by 8. The Suns end up going on to the NBA Finals. But, think about, I think it wasn't until the next year that the next year would have been the Denver Seattle year, right?
Correct.
So this Lakers team might have been the first team to was very close to being the first 8 seed to win a first round playoff game, because it didn't happen again until the next year. And then just sort of, if you think about it, that means the Suns are eliminated. So who do the Bulls end up playing in the conference final or in the NBA Finals? Is it instead of Phoenix, it would have been the Lakers against San Antonio. Would it have probably been maybe Seattle getting to the finals, the 93 Sonics against the Bulls? Just kind of an interesting thought to think about if a couple of things had gone differently in that game.
Seattle ended up taking Phoenix to 7, so that's probably where your money originally goes. I actually think that maybe Houston also would have gone a year early, because Houston took Seattle to 7, and then Seattle took Phoenix to 7. So it's that would have been the closest we would have gotten to those 2 Olajuwon teams that won the next 2 years while Jordan was gone. And would there
if Houston wins that, how different is history? So again, we're playing multiple degrees of whatever based on if James Worthy made a layup there, but just an interesting kind of thought exercise,
And that's what we do on Hello Old Sports.
Yes. So the reality of it is they lose in the first round. They're an 8 seed again. And that brings us into the 93-94 season, as some of these guys start to really peel away at this point, and they miss the playoffs for the first time in 18 seasons.
They do. This is the year they draft Nick Van Exel to be their point guard, rookie out of Cincinnati. They draft Van Exel. They also draft George Lynch, who's not nearly as much of a factor. Worthy is still around for his final year. Byron Scott's gone. AC Green is gone. AC Green, I think, went to Phoenix
and Byron Scott went to Indiana. Neither of these guys retired.
Yeah, but they were both on the team the year before, I believe. Scott was there and Green was there. Yeah, so you're down to just Worthy, although they do bring back Kurt Rambis, but I'm talking about guys who had been there sort of continually. You're down to just Worthy. Main starters this year are Van Exel as a rookie, Divock, Eldon Campbell, and then a bunch of guys. Doug Christie, who later is on the Knicks, and after that, the Sacramento Kings with Divock in the late 90s, early 2000s. And who is that?
Kind of funny. Sam Bowie.
Sam Bowie, that's right. Yeah, he's the guy who was drafted between Olajuwon and Jordan is kind of...
I saw my note here and I was like, is that right? Or did I just write that down incorrectly? And then I reviewed it. It is right.
This 93-94 team, they're one of the youngest teams in the league. They have an average age of 23.4 years. And that's especially interesting when you realize you got some of these guys with the older ages who are really kind of bringing it down with, that James Edwards is 38 and Danny Shays is 34. But nonetheless, they got lots of guys under 25 on this team. So an average age of 23.4.
And by the way, there are some college teams now with the COVID year and the unlimited transit. There's some college teams I'm serious, who that's their average age, but go ahead.
So Randy Fund, who had coached the team to a playoff appearance the year before, gets off to a not great start. He's 27-37. Jerry West, as general manager or team president, whatever West's title is, had actually given Fund a contract extension earlier in the year, but they decide midway through the season they're going to fire Randy Fund. The team has a 27-37 record. Bill Burtka, who's a guy I know next to nothing about Bill Burtka, but he was an assistant coach with the Lakers from good God. He started in 82, basically Riley's first year, and he was an assistant with them in 2000, 2001, all the way up to the second Kobe Shaq year. He's actually interim coach of the Lakers 2 different times during this time period that we're talking about. Bill Burtka coaches for 2 games, and then in late in the season, in the spring of 1994, for reasons that remain somewhat unclear, they hire Magic Johnson to be the new head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers.
By the way, when Randy Fund is let go, the press release from Jerry West's office says the team was displaying bad fundamentals with a P.
Gosh. Good Lord.
So Magic, who had flirted with a comeback as a player, and now and would again, is now in the middle, becomes the coach. And I mean, he really. Oh, and by the way, just to put a button on Fund, do you know where he spends most of the rest of his career? Which, given what his title was, it shouldn't be this obscure, but that kind of shows what the nature of what his actual role was.
I don't.
He was the GM in Miami for a lot of years.
Oh, because he and Riley were buddies.
Yeah, but I mean, he really was not even a figurehead, because a figurehead implies people think he has some authority, but he was just kind of Riley's assistant in Miami, basically, while Riley ran the show. But that is where he ended up for a number of years. I think I have this here. Whatever, I'll find it. Not super important to what we're talking about, but that's where Randy Fund ultimately ends up.
So a couple of things about this. First of all, the Lakers had been sort of flirting with the idea of bringing Magic in as coach for a while. They talked about it when Dunleavy left at the beginning of 92. And I don't remember, I might have even seen, they might have even talked about it briefly when Riley left in 91, that maybe Magic would transition into some sort of a coaching role. Also, the Atlanta Hawks had wanted Magic to be their coach in early 93. Now, whether Magic would actually have done that, who knows? But there had been interest in Magic Johnson coaching from both the Lakers and some other places for at least the last couple of years. The other thing is that the Lakers, despite only being 27 and 37, had actually been on an upswing. They'd been 7-2 before they hired Magic, so they'd been doing really well under Fund, and then I guess 2 games under Bill Burtka. So it's not like they had been gradually getting worse. They'd actually been gradually getting better, but for whatever reason, they, Jerry Buss, who's a friend of Magic's, going back to Magic's rookie year, decides that what they really want to do is bring Magic Johnson in to be the head coach. And they start off pretty well. They win 5 of their first 6 games under Magic, but then the wheels sort of come off shortly after that. After going 5 of his first 6, he then loses his next 10 games in a row. And that is the end of the coaching career of one Earvin Magic Johnson.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the Lakers' finances in 1994, but like this seems like a thing. It would make sense for the Hawks to do that. You know what I mean? It's like Babe Ruth, when the Dodgers hired Babe Ruth to be the first base coach and take batting practice. It's like, well, we can probably get some people to come watch our head coach. But the Lakers, even the Lakers on hard times are still the Los Angeles Lakers. What do you think it was? Was it just that Jerry Buss was just sort of felt indebted to Magic and given the way his playing career had ended, that he just kind of felt he owed it to him, or what?
No,
I think it was.
I think it was actually the opposite. I think that Magic didn't really want to do it. And I believe that Lon Rosen is his agent, right? Yeah, Lon Rosen, who I think is Magic's long-term agent, who later I think has partnered with Magic on some of his endeavors, like with the Dodgers and that type of thing. But so in the spring, Buss had reached out to Lon Rosen and had said, I need a favor. I need Earvin to coach the team. Maybe this was one of those situations. Buss, probably like a lot of owners and a lot of people involved in sports, really kind of wants to relive the glory days, and he's got Magic there. I think he's still paying Magic. Like you said, it could be sort of a financial decision. Magic never really wanted to do it. In fact, they're celebrating with champagne after Magic's first victory, and Magic calls Lon Rosen over and says, get me out of this. So even after his first win, and things seem to at least potentially be going well, he really does not want to be doing it. A couple of things that happened. He's getting questions from the media, and sort of half about basketball, and then half about how he's doing with the virus. And this is what one observer says. He says, after the game, there was this sort of back and forth in the post-game interview. He's getting questions from the LA Times, and then somebody hops in with a medical question. Then he gets a question from the LA Daily News, and then it's the New England Journal of Medicine with a question. Here's a guy that 1 second is being asked about that turnover in the third quarter, and the next question is about his cocktail load of medicine that he's been put on for HIV. It was just the strangest thing ever.
It's funny. I heard almost I was listening to a press conference the other day with a wrestler that was being conducted mostly in character. And then they asked him a question about his real life leukemia recovery. And he kind of had to answer that question out of character. Yeah. So he had to kind of switch and say, well, I'll be on, whatever drug for the rest of my life. It's a it's a suppressant, whatever. But yeah, I could see where that is, especially for a guy who doesn't want the job really to begin with, to have to in the middle of it answer health questions.
Yeah, it was that Roman Reigns.
Roman Reigns did not ask the question of Magic Johnson. No. But yes, he is a wrestler who in real life has had a few bouts with leukemia and had referenced that he's on a whatever it is, but like it's a continuous drug he takes to, keep the leukemia in remission. And like in the middle of asking him about like, your tactics tonight as bad guy wrestler, he had to answer like a sincere question about his leukemia. So, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
So then the other thing that happens is Magic, as he did as a player, gets frustrated with a lot of the guys he's coaching. And there's one story about how they're practicing at like 7:00 in the morning and a beeper starts going off. This is kind of maybe the earlier days of beepers. And they finally discover that it's Vlade Divac's beeper going off. And Magic yanks the beeper out of Vlade Divac's hand and shoves it against the wall or throws it against the wall, shattering it into a bunch of pieces. The sort of the coda to the story is that the only reason Vlade Divac's beeper was going off at that time of the morning during practice was that his wife was 9 months pregnant and she was trying to get a hold of him for, I think she was going into labor. But nonetheless, so coaching probably not for Magic Johnson, I would say.
Yeah, and Magic, I think even as a player, and I think it might have been that show. I forget what book it was. It might have been that Showtime Lakers book where they basically said like people have the wrong impression of what it was like to be around those Lakers teams. Like Magic Johnson smiled a lot, and but like he was a stone breaker to his teammates, just like Larry Bird and just like Michael Jordan were. Maybe not as sociopathic, but he was not a happy-go-lucky guy in the locker room, really.
No, he was like you said, he was an ass kicker. So
yeah.
So they realized going into the 94-95 season that they've got to do something a little different, and they bring in Del Harris to be the coach. Del Harris, who is a Hall of Fame coach, who had led the Rockets to the NBA Finals against the Lakers in 1981, the team that had lost to Boston, I should say, in 81. And then he'd had some success also in Milwaukee. Guy who'd been in the playoffs basically every year as a coach until his last year in Milwaukee. Also ironic that, the guy who replaced him in Milwaukee was Dunleavy. And now here the Lakers go a couple years later, bringing in Del Harris to coach their team.
And by this point, Worthy's gone, right? He's not on the team in 94, 95.
He's gone.
That's pretty. There's really nobody left. I mean, I know Rambis is still technically there, but for the most part, this team is not. There's no real connection left uninterrupted to the Showtime Lakers.
That's correct, and they've got Van Exel, who's in his second year. They had signed Cedric Ceballos from the Suns, who had been one of the key role players on that final Suns team. They sign him in the offseason. They draft Eddie Jones, who would go on, a shooting guard, who would go on to be a key member of the team throughout much of the 90s. So the sort of the framework of a good team is starting to develop. Van Exel, Jones, Divac, Ceballos, Eldon Campbell, even. This is a team, they're starting to form their own identity, and the identity is of a decent enough team. In 94-95, they finish 48-34, which is fifth in the Western Conference. So they're getting there. They're a pretty good team.
Yeah, and I think the fact that they finally are, there's no remnants really of the last team, and no sort of obligation to pretend it's still the vestiges of that team. No,
that had come the following year.
Yeah, which we'll get into. We're going to need a break before we get to the 95-96 season, just because there's a lot there. But if you almost forget who they are and what they were 6 years before that, it's again they're a theoretically an up and coming team, except for The only guys over 30 on the team are Sadale Threet and Sam Bowie, and then Kurt Rambis. But Kurt Rambis at this point he plays in 26 games. It really doesn't,
if he's not officially a player coach by this point, he's basically a player coach.
Yeah, and Van Exel is becoming a nice young player. This is really the high watermark for Nick Van Exel as a Laker in terms of positives without negative downside. And they go ahead. Sorry.
The one thing I was going to say is that Harris and Van Exel clash almost immediately.
So they're the 5 seed. They play the Supersonics in the first round. They beat them in a best of 4. They beat them 3-1. And then that gives them the Spurs, who I'm guessing would have been the number 1 seed. And they play the Spurs in the second round. And it's their first time out of the first round since 91?
Yeah, because 92, they lost Portland. 93 was Phoenix. 94, they didn't make it. And then 95, yeah. So.
Yeah, so they get to the second round against the Spurs. They win game 3 and game 5, and they ultimately end up losing in 6 to the Spurs, who would then go on to be upset in the next round. But, they're back to, they win 48 games. They get to the second round. They, look like a team that's headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and this is just a little bit on the Harris Van Exel situation. Harris had been coaching at sort of a pre-draft camp when Van Exel was coming out to be ready to be drafted. Harris didn't like the fact that Van Exel never listened, so he actually benched him during this camp, and they never really recover from that. In this Jeff Perlman book, Eddie Jones says Dell tried everything to be cool with Nick, but Nick had his mind made up already on Dell, and they never got along. You'd never see Nick high-five Dell, have a meeting with Dell. Normally, a coach and his floor leader work together, but not like this. They get into arguments in practice. Harris is later quoted as saying, Van Exel was our point guard for 4 years, but he hated me. And Jerry West sort of helped massage him along. A couple other things that I would note just about Harris. First of all, it's widely understood by all of his players that he talks too much. When he's trying to give a team pep talk, he just kind of drones on and on and on. The other thing, and I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but I'm going to mention it as well. Del Harris is an early pioneer. Do you know what he's a pioneer in?
Did we talk about this already? Is he the guy with the website?
At the behest of his wife, Anne, he hired a designer to create www.delharris.com, then charged visitors $20 for a 1-year membership that included an autographed photograph, an official Dell's Club membership card, a quarterly newsletter, and a birthday card. Fewer than 100 people subscribed.
Yeah, I think you probably overshot there. I found an article.
Who would want their Del Harris fan club membership card? And more importantly, what was in the newsletter every quarter?
I found an article on the website is called Forum Blue and Gold. It's like a Lakers blog. And I just thought there's nothing groundbreaking here, but it's an article. This team was called the Lake Show. That was like their nickname, where the 80s Lakers had been to Showtime. And it's written by it's sent in by a contributor to the website, guy named Chris J. And he just said, like, he wrote this article and he talked about it. He's like, this was a fun team. He's like, there was no expectations. He was like, he lived through the 80s. He lived through the Kobe and Shaq years. This was obviously written in the last 10 or 15 years. And he just said it was like, you went into this season with no expectations, and there were some good, young, fun guys, Van Exel, Jones, Anthony Peeler is a name he mentions. Doug Christie was on the team until he was traded to the Knicks. They just, he kind of, he's not going overboard about it, but he's just saying, like, yeah, we enjoyed them. They had like a swagger. They were, the first good team they'd had in a while. They won a playoff series. So, a team that I think maybe a lot of people have a certain team, if they've been a fan of a team for a long time, a team that for whatever reason just kind of sticks with them, even though by all rights there was nothing that special about them. Yeah. So I just thought that article was kind of cool.
Yeah, and they won a playoff series, which always gives you excitement when you have a team that hasn't been there in a few years and finally wins a playoff series. 95-96 is an interesting year, and it's really an interesting year because this is the year that after what? Magic Johnson hasn't played in a regular season or playoff NBA game in 92, 93, 94, 3 full seasons. He's had basically 92,
91, 92.
You're right. 4 full seasons. 4 full seasons. Because he had the year he was out last minute because the HIV, then his aborted comeback. Then he had the year he coached. And then it was almost like he couldn't let 94, 95, there was finally a season where he wasn't involved at all. And it was almost like he couldn't let that sit. And I just remember when I heard about this, I remember you saying, I think we were at the dinner table, and you said, I heard Magic Johnson is coming back. And I said, no, that has to be wrong, because it was only like, 9 months to a year after Jordan had come back. And I thought you had just been mistaken or something. And then our father said, no, he is. And I just remember being shocked by it, but it happened.
So he doesn't come back right at the start of the season. He comes back in like March, right? Is that correct? Or January?
His first game back is January 30th, 1996 against Golden State. They replay this game on NBA TV all the time. The Lakers, they get off to a slow start, but they're 24-18 under Del Harris by the time Magic comes back. So that's 42 games into the season. That's basically half the season. In his first game back, he has 19 points, 8 rebounds, and 10 assists. So in 27 minutes, so damn near a triple double. There's a lot to unpack with this comeback. So why don't you start, and then I'll take it from there.
Yeah, so we'll do Magic. We're specifically talking about Magic, right?
Yeah, well, and the team is like we said going in. By this point, it's basically the same team. They don't really they draft Frankie King, who is really not anybody. It's basically the same team this year as it was the year before. There are no major offseason acquisitions. It's still Ceballos, Van Exel, Divac, Eddie Jones, Eldon Campbell. It's still pretty much the same team that it had been the year before.
So I think the first thing you just got to point out is he's 36. He hasn't played in 4 years. Whatever benefit there is to that in terms of his legs being a little bit fresher is more than negated by, let's just say this. You can see pictures of Magic Johnson's career and tell which ones are from his comeback by body type.
Well, he bulked up by about 30 pounds, and he plans to play power forward.
Mm-hmm. And, I've always wondered if some of that had to do with, the medication he had to take, and still, if that contributed to some of it. Some of it's probably just that he was, not keeping up with the lifestyle of an NBA player regularly. And he's older. So this is not the Magic Johnson we would have seen if he'd come back in 1992.
He still is a very close friend of Jerry Buss. And so, he starts talking first to Buss about wanting to come back, and also to Jerry West. So to the two Jerrys, and he decides he wants to come back. 2 weeks before this, that USA Today runs an article. The headline is Magic Johnson has no plans to return to the Lakers, even though he's been working out with the team. Del Harris meets with him and insists on the following 3 things. He can't be the point guard. He can't be the shooting guard because they've got Van Exel and they've got Eddie Jones, and he can't expect to start. Magic Johnson agrees. And at the beginning, it starts off well. A couple of these guys were his teammates already, Campbell, Divac, on that last team, on that Dunleavy team that made it to the NBA final. So it's not like he's never played with any of these guys before, but he's nucleus.
Coached a lot of them.
He's coached a lot of them, exactly. And they didn't like him as a coach. But Van Exel, Ceballos, Jones, he's not played with any of those guys And he really kind of starts alienating people almost right away. First of all, he explains after 2 days, he explains to a reporter that he really should be considered for the Olympic team. After 2 days, 1 game, he hasn't played. Let me, and I got to pull up this thing from Sports Illustrated because I remember this from reading it in Sports Illustrated, sort of describing his comeback. So this guy who hasn't played in 4 years and is only 1 game into his comeback is already talking about how not only should he be playing more of a role with his team, but he should be on the Olympic team.
Rightly, wrongly, whatever. He's not as sympathetic a figure as it would have been 4 years ago. In 1992, he's a guy who was in the prime of his career, contracted this virus, had to retire, tries to make a comeback, basically to fill the role they were still, it would still have been his role. So he's a little more sympathetic of a figure there. Now it's a guy 4 years later who's already, by the way, briefly coached this team, whether he wanted to or not, he did.
Yeah.
The team, and look, I'm not, as we're going to cover here, some of the guys on this team don't exactly deserve a lot of sympathy, but like, if you're, let's say, Nick Van Exel, and you're like, the last few years has been all about like trying to rebuild this team, sort of coming out of the shadows of this 80s team. And, we're finally on the right path to that. And now here comes this guy. And not only is he coming back, he's going to start expounding on who he is and what he ought to be 2 games into his return, that he ought to be on the Olympic team. Like I said, he's Magic Johnson. He's, still certainly, it's not like he's 50 or anything, but like a little less sympathetic than 4 or 5 years earlier in terms of playing again.
So if you hug me for being a fan of Rick Riley, you'd be hanging an innocent man. But nonetheless, I actually think that Rick Riley had a good intro here. He said, as usual, life made no sense last week in Los Angeles, where the Lakers signed a 36-year-old has-been point guard, has-been announcer, has-been coach, and has-been owner who has been off NBA courts for almost 5 seasons, is 30 pounds above his playing weight, runs like a man with bunions, couldn't leap a tall juice glass, favors a James Naismith era flat-footed shot put heave for a jumper, and oh yes, is HIV positive. So
that's laying it on a little thick, but yeah. So you wonder how much he's actually filling a need, I guess, is what you could say.
And he alienates his teammates almost immediately. When he first joins the team, he went directly to his old locker, now filled with the belongings of George Lynch, the third-year forward, and reclaimed it. He didn't ask or offer money. He just took it. By his 4th game, he was insisting that he needed to be on the court more. He really is not good for Cedric Ceballos. He kind of, his being there really sort of sends Ceballos into a bad place, to the point where Ceballos just disappears. On March 20th, the day before, on March 19th, Ceballos plays a season-low 12 minutes against Seattle. Then Magic says in the press that Magic should be starting at small forward over Ceballos. So Ceballos disappears. He goes AWOL. He's believed to be out water skiing. 5 days after he vanished, he returns and says, I had some very personal and family problems to deal with. I don't think there's any real detail or elaboration. So it totally alienates Ceballos. Later in the season, Nick Van Exel gets in an argument with a referee. Go ahead.
On the Ceballos thing, I have a Sports Illustrated article here from the time. So he wasn't on their charter flight to Seattle. Didn't really contact anybody with the team. Didn't contact anybody with the team at all. He's a captain on this team, by the way, but he doesn't go. Missed a team flight to Seattle. Lakers suspended him. No one in the organization heard from him for 5 days. His agent arrived at exec President Jerry West's office Sunday afternoon, about 3 hours before LA's game against the Hornets. This thing categorizes it as an astonishing display of unprofessionalism. he'd missed both the flight to Seattle, 2 games, both losses, 2 practices, was fined $54,000 in change, 2,000 in fines. He said he spent at least part of the time away from the team with a male and 2 female companions, one of whom, says Slaughter, his agent, was Ceballos' wife, at the London Bridge Resort in Lake Havasu, Arizona. He'd been trying to resolve a serious family problem, the nature of which he chose not to reveal. However, he had apparently been able to stop wrestling with the crisis long enough to go water skiing on the lake and dancing at Kokomo's, a local night spot. Last Thursday night, around the time Ceballos' teammates were losing 104-93 in Seattle, Kokomo's patrons and employees saw him sipping a beverage and signing autographs. At the press conference, he gave no explanation for his failure to inform the Lakers other than to say, "That's a mistake I made. There's no reason for that at all. It was a bad situation, and I went about it the wrong way." Insisted he did not leave in a huff over reduced playing time, despite evidence to the contrary. Blah 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 blah. So, one of your key players goes AWOL for several days amidst team chemistry issues.
Later in the season, Van Exel gets into an argument with a referee. He pushes the referee, ends up getting suspended for 8 games. First out of the box to criticize him is Magic Johnson, criticizing him for his immaturity and all that type of thing, which ends up holding a little bit less water a few weeks later when Magic Johnson gets in an argument with a referee, bumps the referee, and himself gets suspended for 3 games. So he's really just starting to just kind of tick everybody off. The Lakers end up in this season, they end up finishing with a 53-29 record, which is pretty good, but they lose the Western Conference. What are they? This is the first round, I believe. The first round they lose 3-1 to the 2-time defending champion Houston Rockets. This is the same Rocket team of Olajuwon, Drexler, that whole thing. So, and then they're out.
Yeah, they are what seed are they in the 95-96? They're the 4th seed in the Western Conference. So they lose the 4-5 series to the Rockets in 4 games. And, even though they made the playoffs, they only were 1 round further away. What was previously a young up-and-coming team is now a team with some prima donna problems, with some chemistry problems. You wonder, is the coach continuing to, is the coach doing the job he needs to be doing? Promising can turn into troubling very quickly. And this was certainly one of those years where really what went well for them, in terms of getting better from the year before in 95-96.
So Magic retires. It's not up until the very end. He's talking like he's going to play again. He's saying he's either going to stay in LA or he's going to go somewhere else. So the retirement is a little bit surprising in that he previously had been talking about how he wanted to keep playing. But as with everything else, as with the other comebacks, as with the coaching stint, it really is, it's one story 1 minute, it's another story the next minute. I guess if you want to sort of look at it with a little bit of a silver lining, the fact that he was able to at least go out for basketball reasons rather than for illness or fear of his opponent, his opponents or teammates fearing him, that's probably at least a silver lining. He said he's able at least to go out on his own terms to some degree.
So that brings us to the off season of 1996. And I don't know if anything really significant happens that we need to get into between the beginning of the 1995. No.
Yeah.
If we were doing an episode on the next era of Laker greatness, this is where this episode would start. So do you start with the draft or do you start with free agency?
So I think you have to start with the draft because
it was first.
And the Lakers trade Vlade Divac to Charlotte to get their pick so that they can draft Kobe Bryant or they can acquire Kobe Bryant.
Actually,
Charlotte drafts Kobe.
Mm-hmm.
But the Lakers trade Divac for the rights to Kobe Bryant, with the assumption that they're going to be able to bring in Shaquille O'Neal, but they're taking sort of a risk there. So I guess you kind of want to start with the draft and the trade of the guy who's really kind of been the stalwart of the team since the early 90s, Divac, probably the longest. I think he's probably the longest tenured Laker at this point. And they trade him so that they can draft this 18-year-old son of a former NBA player in Kobe Bryant.
So this is an article from about 4 years ago, actually shortly after Kobe died. And it's by Jasmine Wimbish on CBS Sports. And she's just kind of recounting everything. Charlotte has the 13th pick. I guess Divac originally had refused, basically said, if you trade me to Charlotte, I'm not going to go. So that obviously made Charlotte a little reticent to do the deal. Said Divac's trepidation about being traded to Charlotte began to dissipate after he visited the city and came around to the idea of playing there. Arn tell him Kobe's coming out of college. They're coming out directly out of high school, Philadelphia area, Lower Marion, son of a former NBA player and LaSalle great Joe Jellybean Bryant. Kobe's, it's not LeBron 7-8 years later, but he's a well-known, for a high school player, he's very well-known and, has made it known that he wants to play in Los Angeles. There's questions about whether the Nets are going to take him at number 8. And Arn, funny, a guy who's in the news today, but tell him Kobe's agent has to meet with then Nets coach John Calipari and convince him not to take Kobe Bryant, pressuring him not to take him if he fell, left not knowing if they would pass. The Nets end up taking Kerry Kittles from Villanova instead. Hornets take.
There's another half of this too, which is that at the same time he's getting threatened by Arn Tellem, who's Kobe's agent, Calipari's also getting threatened by David Falk, who is Kerry Kittles' agent. And Kittles, who was from Villanova, which is not that far from Jersey, Kittles wants to play in New Jersey. Somebody does, I guess. And Falk says that unless the Nets pick Kittles, no one he represented would ever consider playing for the Nets. So he's getting threatened by Kobe's agents not to pick him. He's getting threatened by Kittle's agents that he has to pick him. Now, threatening that you have to pick a guy is a little bit extreme because that's just, what if he's not there? What if whatever? But finally, Calipari, who's hemming and hawing, and people are telling Calipari, don't listen to the threats. Pick Kobe Bryant. He's going to be a star. But Calipari, who'd come from college, finally blurts out, do you really think we're going to win with an 18-year-old? So he ends up going with Kittles. And like you were about to say, Kobe slips all the way to the Hornets at 13.
So they end up making the deal, sending Kobe to the Lakers. Vlade Divac goes off to the Hornets. And then ironically, within a couple of years is on the Kings on what was that first run of the Lakers, the early 2000 Lakers, their greatest sort of opposition in the Western, well, really in the NBA on the Sacramento Kings. But for the moment, Divac is sent off to Charlotte. Kobe, the 18-year-old, just out of high school, just out of graduating, and he's out in Los Angeles. They also, by the way, with the 24th pick in that draft, they acquired they draft Derek Fisher, who becomes a big part of those teams as well.
Yeah, he becomes the point guard on all of the Laker championship teams, all 5 of them during the Kobe era.
So we're kind of talking, we spent a lot of the early time talking about the parting of all the Showtime Lakers guys, and now we're into this sort of buildup of the next era of guys. So obviously Kobe, the main factor there, but Derek Fisher bears at least, being mentioned. Shall we discuss free agency?
Yes. And this is maybe the biggest free agent signing in NBA history. LeBron is probably above it, but other than that, this is probably the biggest one. Yeah, exactly.
So, and again, I know we're not revealing any truths, but So Shaquille O'Neal, one of the best players in the NBA, certainly one of the, at this point, has to be the second biggest star in the NBA behind Jordan, I would think. He's 24 years old. He's taken Orlando to a finals already. This Orlando team that's, was an expansion team, and this is another thing the Orlando Magic were a national team for a while there with Kobe, or not with Kobe, excuse me, with Shaq and Penny Hardaway. And, the jerseys and the uniforms, which you look back at them now and they were hideous, but people everywhere had those jerseys, where we were in New York, and, it was probably second to Chicago Bulls jerseys all over the country. So it kind of seems like, well, there's no way Orlando's going to blow this. And the Magic make an early offer. It's under what Shaq wants. They really lowball him to a point where Shaq is offended. And some of these guys, when they claim being offended, they're really not as offended as so much, they're playing that up. But this was a real lowball offer. What they also do is the Magic criticize O'Neal's rebounding and defense publicly, I guess in some sort of quest to drive his asking price down. But really what that does is piss him off. And
yeah, it's not baseball. You're not in salary arbitration here.
So this article is really in depth, but it obviously talks a lot about what happened with Orlando. They talk about the different options at the time. If he left Orlando, his preference was to go to a big market. There weren't many teams that fit all the requirements. This is the list we came up with. I'll do this real quick. Knicks, long shot, because it would have been dependent on them trading Patrick Ewing. Detroit was seen as attractive because of Grant Hill at the time. They also had Allen Houston. Pistons never really showed much interest. Miami, roster flexibility. They did have Alonzo Mourning, blah, blah, blah. Atlanta, I guess, was a team that was at least somewhat, in discussions, but Orlando figured there wasn't a ton of competition. Lakers make this trade to, this article refers to it as the Kobe trade was the most significant draft day trade since the St. Louis Hawks sent the draft rights to Bill Russell to the Celtics. In a piece of cost-cutting brilliance, the Lakers sent... Oh, no, never mind. They're not being sarcastic. Saying the Lakers sent veteran center and fan favorite Vlade. That's the other thing. Not only did they get Kobe for trading Vlade Divac,
they're freeing up money.
They freed up money. Yeah, 3.3 extra million in cap space. And, we won't go blow by blow on it, but they acquire Shaq. Shaq was also in Orlando. There was a power struggle with Brian Hill, the coach. He wanted Hill fired. He was starting to, the relationship with Penny Hardaway was starting to fray, where he was, he thought Penny was trying to sort of usurp him as the star of the team. I don't think any of that, I don't think the Penny thing would have been a roadblock if the money had been right and he felt the Magic were treating him with respect. The Brian Hill thing would have been, but let's be honest. If they agreed on money and he said, my condition is you fire Brian Hill, they would have fired Brian Hill.
Yeah, and he talks about how he feels a little bit disrespected by Penny, but then he goes to L.A. and deals with Van Exel, and he ends up talking about how much he misses Penny. So, yeah,
and I think they, years later, I think that all became kind of water under the bridge. But so, this Laker team that in the span of a couple of weeks here has brought back or has drafted Kobe Bryant, who, he's 18, who knows, but he's certainly got a lot of hype around him. And they've brought in the biggest free agent they could possibly get. And, again, it needs to be mentioned. The legacy of big men signing with the Lakers, even at that point, has had a pretty good track record. It worked with Kareem. It worked with Wilt Chamberlain.
And there's a famous Sports Illustrated cover of the NBA preview issue from that year. And I don't know why Wilt didn't participate. I'm sure there was some reason, but it's him, Kareem, and George Mikan on the front page on the front cover of the Sports Illustrated. It's one of the great covers in Sports Illustrated history. So the other thing I would just mention about Shaquille and He's obviously a guy who's got a lot of aspects of his character. He's a guy who could be lazy at times, especially maybe a little later in his career. With the possible exception of Kobe and maybe Van Exel too, he is probably the best teammate in NBA history. Buying guys cars and, rookies and saying, I'm putting a down payment on a car for you, no questions asked, or no, you're not no questions asked, but no debate. I'm doing this and you're going to deal with it. Flying players, rookies, flying their families out, their parents out so they could see them play, all those types of things. Years later, he famously agrees to pay for George Mikan's funeral when it turns out that George Mikan's family, wasn't left with very much money. So for all his flaws and some of his issues, he is a guy who just is beloved by his teammates and I think deep down is a really good guy. He's got his character flaws, but he's a good guy, Shaq.
Yeah. And I mean, look, a guy who's that big of a star, to say nothing of the size, he's not going to be free of ego. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, I think when you factor in, all of the things that come with a star of his magnitude, yeah, it seems like most people really, really like him.
So 96, 97, Kobe is a rookie. It's Shaq's first year. Kobe doesn't do well with the coaching style of Del Harris. Harris has sort of a very kind of hands-off approach. I'm looking at some of the minutes played here by Kobe. Very few of them are double digits, and he's got a lot of DMPs here. He's got a lot of did not plays. Even in the playoffs that year, the first game of the playoffs, Kobe plays 46 seconds. Game 2, he plays 450, and then he's up to 26, but then he's back down to 534 for the last game of the Portland series, and then plays a little more in the Utah series in 97, but in one game he only plays 4 minutes and 28 seconds. So Harris, his issues with Van Exel very much continue, and he's also having issues with Kobe at this point as well.
I should also mention at some point in this season, they trade Cedric Ceballos for Robert Horry. So they acquire another guy who's going to be a key part of, so if you think about just in the span of the last, 6 months or whatever, Horry, Fisher, Shaq, Kobe are all added to this team while getting rid of Ceballos. We're still going to talk in a little while about another, guy from the Lake Show team that's on his way out the door the next season. But yeah, they beat Portland 3-1 in the first round. I don't remember what seed they were this year, but they beat Portland in the first round. They're the 4 seed again, excuse me. They beat Portland, and then they play Utah, who is on their way to their first of 2 straight NBA finals, and they lose in 5. Game 5 is in overtime. I believe in that game, Kobe shoots 4 straight air balls between the end of the fourth quarter and overtime.
This is against Utah.
Maybe not straight, but he shoots 4 air balls.
Yeah, no, I read about that too. Yeah, he's shooting air balls in the playoffs against Utah, which isn't doing anything to help engender trust from Del Harris.
But they're still, they're a team on the rise heading into 97, 98. Did you have anything on that last team before we go forward?
Yeah, just sort of a little more on the weirdness of Kobe. It says, first of all, at one point he asks Del Harris why he's not getting more post-ups called for him instead of Shaq, which, maybe the fact that Shaq is quite a deal bigger than Kobe Bryant, especially an 18-year-old Kobe Bryant. O'Neal had envisioned sort of a little brother, big brother thing between Kobe and Shaq, but it didn't really work. Bryant refused to be a part of things. The other Lakers played cards and called trash. Kobe would sit there watching a movie. If I gave you 100 guesses, you probably wouldn't guess which movie they say he would be watching.
What's a movie?
The 10 Commandments, which is the 4-hour Charlton Heston epic of from the mid 1950s.
which was on a couple of weeks ago, the night before Easter, which at first I was like, oh, it makes sense because tomorrow's Easter. And then I realized it doesn't make any sense that that's what's on the night before Easter.
There's another story where a bunch of them go out to dinner and Kobe doesn't attend. And then like an hour into it, Kobe comes into the restaurant and goes and sits in the corner by himself with a book. Shaq is starting to get increasingly frustrated with Kobe, especially in the future seasons, and starts making veiled and not so veiled references to the press about how he's so frustrated with Kobe. At one point, Shaq gestures at Kobe in front of a bunch of people and says, "There's the problem with our team." So neither guy, and this stays true for the whole time that they're together, neither guy is sort of willing to meet the other halfway. And Kobe is a different guy. And I think he's sort of, and I want to be very careful how I say this, but one of the things that I think people would think about with Kobe and maybe get frustrated with is that he tried to act somewhat like he tried to play a tough guy, sort of an NBA trash talker Iverson type thing, when what he really was a guy who would watch the 10 Commandments and read a book in a crowded restaurant.
So going into 97, 98, they signed Rick Fox in the offseason. So another add-on.
One other thing I should mention, 2 Lakers make the second team all rookie team. One of them is Kobe and one of them is Travis Knight. So, yeah, 2 guys who would have a little bit divergent careers, but in the spring of 1997, both second team all rookie.
So in 97, 98, they signed Rick Fox. The starting lineup at the beginning of the year, it looks like, is Shaq, Eddie Jones, Rick Fox, Horry, and Van Exel. They start 11-0, and then Shaq gets hurt. He strains a stomach muscle, and it's enough to put him out for 20 games, so a full quarter of the season. So after starting out 11-0, obviously they, fall on some hard times when Shaq goes down for, God, that's got to be, 2 months or around 2 months.
Yeah. We should also note that 4 Lakers make the All-Star team this year. Shaq and Kobe as starters, and Eddie Jones is Nick Van Exel is as backups. So you don't see that a lot in the NBA ever, but 4 Lakers All-Stars in 97, 98.
Yeah, which is like a third of the team. Or
exactly.
Close to a third of the team, because by this point it's probably a few more All-Star teams, All-Stars on the team. They do manage to finish 61-21, and they're the 2 seed. Before we go into the playoffs, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about this year?
No, I just think the issues of Kobe being aloof from his teammates, Shaq being injured, and Van Exel just alienating everybody. Those are continuing as they go into these 98 playoffs.
So again, they're the 2 seed. They play Portland in the first round, who's the 7 seed. They beat Portland 3-1. They go to the second round and they play Seattle. They beat Seattle in 5 games, so 4-1. And for the first time since 1991, they are now in the Western Conference Finals against Utah, who had beat them in the playoffs last year, had made the finals in 96, 97. And it was interesting, I remember, because by this point, on the other side of the bracket, it's the Bulls, and it's pretty clear it's their last run. And they were either, at this point, they'd been in 5 finals, played 5 different teams, and they were either going to play Utah in a rerun of the last season, or they were going to play the Lakers in a roundabout from the first team they played in that run. Mm-hmm. Now, none of those guys were still there, but it would have been kind of an interesting end cap to it. And they end up getting swept by the Jazz 4-0. And it's during this series that, and I know you like this story, that Nick Van Exel basically writes his own ticket out of town.
At practice before game 4, and then when they're in the huddle, Nick Van Exel says, "All right, everybody, On three, 1, 2, 3, Maui, meaning basically just one more.
Cancun.
Oh, was it Cancun? I thought it was Maui. Well, somewhere where they're going to celebrate, not celebrate. It's where as soon as just got to get one more loss out of the way, and then we'll be able to go relax for the off season.
It's actually worse according to this. It was only after game 2.
Oh,
so
jeez.
they were only down 2-0. The team gathered for their usual ritual at midcourt, putting their hands together and chanting Lakers. Van Exel instead chanted Cancun via the Los Angeles Times, implying that the series was a wrap, showing that he had given up his teammate. It is reported that Shaq was quite upset with the comments, as was Jerry West, the Lakers GM. Well, I would really think those two are the two wrong guys to piss off in this situation. Van Exel still maintains to this day that he was joking. I don't doubt that he was joking. Like, I don't think he was saying, like, yes, I'm going to throw the game so we can go to Cancun. But, like, you know, if that was the first thing Nick Van Exel had ever done wrong as a Laker, you might be like, yeah, it was a really bad time for a joke, but whatever. But, you know, basically signed his own ticket out of town for Los Angeles. They end up getting swept after that. So Van Exel was right.
The other thing I would mention was that Bryant and Harris are becoming increasingly alienated from each other. Bryant comes down with the flu during the second round series with Seattle, and that leads to Harris not playing him. And then Kobe doesn't dress for a game. And then Harris, in the last 2 games of that series, Harris plays him for 312 and 1103. Gets more minutes, although not as many. In the Utah series, his minutes sort of gradually go down 31, 21, 15, and then 18. So Harris is really not all that enthusiastic about giving a lot of playing time to Kobe Bryant.
So we go into 98, 99. Again, we got to remember, this is the lockout season. So they end up with a 50-game season. There's a couple of... Del Harris was traded in the offseason. Or not, Van Exel was traded in the offseason. He called Del Harris a cancer.
Don't you think he probably did that because he saw somebody call him that and he just decided to call somebody else a cancer?
It certainly seems right. I mean, I don't know how you can call the coach a cancer. Like, players can be cancers, really. It's hard for the coach to be a cancer. Del Harris himself is gone after 12 games. They were 6-6, and Jerry West said that one of his 2 assistants, Kurt Rambis or Larry Drew, will handle the coaching duties for the rest of the season. Team had lost 3 consecutive games. There is a sort of funny coincidence, which we'll get to in a minute, about this team that happened on the same day Del Harris was fired. Our boy Bill Burtka comes back and coaches the one game until West decides he says Burtka's going to coach one game until, you know, he decides which of his assistants is going to coach. West said, I just feel the last 2 games we played have not been acceptable. We felt like there was a deterioration. And then he says, if I were the players, I would take a good long look in the mirror right now. And then, of course, towards the end of this article, when asked if he had spoken with former Chicago coach Phil Jackson or anyone else as a long-term successor, West replied, we have not talked to anyone. This happened. This thing says, oh, quickly. I'm guessing he said so quickly. So this all happened in a week. Only 2 days before the firing, former Lakers point guard traded Nick Van Exel called Harris a cancer on the Lakers. So that said Harris was a cancer. So then Harris is fired after 12 games. It ends up being Kurt Rambis for the rest of the season. Do you know what else happened on the same day that Del Harris was fired?
No.
Who finally showed up? A guy they had been negotiating with for a couple of weeks, and had basically agreed to come in but hadn't bothered to show up yet.
Oh, is this when Rodman shows up?
Dennis Rodman. Fresh off, I guess he hadn't played. I mean, he left the Bulls in the 97-90 after the 98 season. If
you think about it, that's not that much time.
Yeah, but guys usually sign somewhere before the season starts.
Well, true. Yeah.
So they bring in Rodman, and at first you would look and go like, oh, of course that didn't work. The Bulls had bought Dennis Rodman in just 3 years earlier. Dennis Rodman was by the time he signed with the Bulls, he was in his, wild era. Like during the time he was with the Spurs is when that kind of grew and grew and grew, and it worked fantastically with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. They won 3 titles. Maybe they weren't getting along so great at the end of it, but they won 3 titles. I believe him and Hogan beat Karl Malone and Diamond Dallas Page in that match. So he signs with the Lakers. It does not go well. It does not last long. He did not enjoy the atmosphere in the locker room and said Kobe and Shaq were jealous of him. He said in an interview with Hoops Hype years later, I could deal with the fame, I could deal with the glamour, I could deal with the glory, and I could deal with the money and stuff like that. But I just couldn't deal with the fact that you had a bunch of young guys on the team that was sitting there bitching, complaining all the damn time. In a separate interview on Shaq and Kobe, Rodman said, it was hard because I knew the fact that Kobe and Shaq wouldn't like me. I know because I saw Jerry Buss. He loved me. I used to date his daughter. So I was dating his daughter at that time. We dated for 6 months, and I know Kobe and Shaq didn't like me because all the attention came to Dennis. Rodman's time with the Lakers was short-lived, playing just 23 games. His passion for the game had seemingly gone. O'Neal gave an insight into what it was like. Shaq said, I don't know when this was, but he said, worst teammate, Dennis Rodman. He was a great player, but he made it hard. Like when you try to corral the guys together and the people above you are letting one guy do whatever he wants. So we had to be there an hour before the game. He'd come in 15 minutes before the game eating chicken and rice. While the coaches are talking, he would jump in the shower, cold shower, come and give you 15, 20 rebounds. He was there for 7 weeks. Yeah, so, I mean, Rodman says he wasn't the problem, but, certainly was. I think at some point with guys like that, what you're getting from them just isn't worth the bull crap.
Yeah, so he shows up. He didn't get there till Harris was leaving, and Bill Burtka only coached the team for what, 1 game?
I think 1 game, yeah.
So in Rambis's first game, meaning Dennis Rodman has been with the team for like a game, he comes up to Kurt Rambis and says, I need a couple of weeks off. I want to go to Vegas and get my head right. So this says Rambis doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. He does make sort of an on-court difference.
He probably played against Rodman in a couple of those finals too.
Rambis, yeah, at least Rambis left the team, I think, after the one that the Lakers won. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to think. Lakers win 10 in a row after Rodman. Rodman comes and Rambis takes over. On March 12th, Rodman is granted an indefinite leave of absence. They ask Rambis how long. Rambis says, you're asking me hypothetical questions for which I have no answer. Rumors are that Rodman is $600,000 in debt. Rodman had given an interview where he told Newsweek that the team depended on him to keep the team afloat. Yeah, and so that's the Rodman thing. So in an already shortened season, they've already they've gone through a coaching change. They've briefly brought in Dennis Rodman for reasons that remain unclear. This is also the year that they trade Eddie Jones. Finally, there'd been rumors all along that Jones was going to be traded. That finally takes place about midway through the 99 season, March 10th, 99. He and Eldon Campbell are traded to the Charlotte Hornets for J.R. Reed, Glenn Rice, and B.J. Armstrong. B.J. Armstrong, who's immediately released, never comes to the Lakers. So 2 things. First of all, they get rid of one of the guys who had been one of the keys of that Lake Show team. And then they also bring in Glenn Rice, who, although his time with the Lakers is short, is the sort of the 3rd guy on the team that would win a championship a year later.
So,
and also I should mention that Jerry Buss had promised Jones earlier in the season that he wouldn't be traded.
So they get to the second round of the playoffs. In the first, they're the 4 seed again. They beat Houston in 4, and then they are swept by the eventual champion Spurs in the second round. And San Antonio actually went on a pretty dominant playoff run that year. They lost the first round, they lost one game to Minnesota. They swept the second round against the Lakers. They swept Portland in the Western Conference Finals, and then they beat the Knicks in 5 in the championship. So, dominated by the Spurs. Also would be really the beginning of, the story of the Western Conference for the next 12 or 13 years. I think from 99 until 2010 or something, the Western Conference champion every year but one was either the Lakers or the Spurs. The one year it was Dallas, and other than that, it was the Lakers.
Dallas the 1 year, yeah. And then actually it's funny because then it was Dallas again in 11.
After that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's either the Spurs, Dallas, or the Lakers every year for 13 seasons? I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's crazy.
Yep. So they lose that, and then we're kind of getting to the end of, what would be the dark era, but 99, 2000, 3 things happen that kind of signify the end of the dark era. One is they win the championship, which obviously signifies
that
the end of the dark era. We're going to talk about Phil will probably be the last thing we talk about because then they're fully formed. But the other thing, and this kind of is just symmetry, but it was also a pretty important factor. That's the year they move into the Staples Center.
Yeah.
So, and that's when you think of the Kobe and Shaq and Phil Jackson team, you think of the Staples Center. The fact that in 1999 they were still playing in the Great Western Forum is kind of surprising to me. I would have pegged it at 96, to be honest, if they moved into the Staples Center. But they move into the Staples Center, which is now the crypto.com arena, but downtown LA, and the Forum is out in Englewood. And they bring in Phil Jackson. And Phil Jackson begins the successful second leg of his coaching career.
And even though it is a corporate name, Staples Center just kind of works as an arena name. I don't really know why, but I never thought of Staples Center as something, crypto.com arena, whatever. But I don't know, Staples Center just kind of, that fit, I feel like, as a name of a downtown basketball arena.
And the other thing too, it was Staples is like a store. It's not something ridiculous. It's not like a bank or an airline, which gets taken over constantly. Like I always say, the one in Philly's been 4 different things. Same with the airline ones. Ironically enough, though, the Great Western Forum was a corporate name too.
Yeah, it was. That's true.
It was just the best corporate name. Great Western was a bank in California. So the Great Western Forum, it sounded like that was the name of it, but it really was a corporate thing. But yeah, so by 2000 they've got their core in place, they've got their coach in place, and they go on a run of 3 titles, and then have their little down period where Kobe has to pass the ball to Smush Parker and Chris Mims, and then they win a couple more. They get to 3 more finals in a row. They win 2 of them, and that's their next great dynastic run for the Los Angeles Lakers.
It's one of these stories of the Lakers in the 90s where there's just so many characters and all-time characters in and out. Magic, Kobe, Shaq, Phil, Rodman, all of these guys sort of in and out. And it's you don't think about it, but they went from having Magic Johnson on the team to Kobe and Shaq in the course of 6 months. So there's really not it almost as if it took them signing Kobe and Shaq, or drafting Kobe and signing Shaq. It's almost as if that was what it took to finally get them out of the shadow of the Magic years.
Yeah. I think that's a fair analysis of it. And again, we're really just talking a 6 or 7 year gap here in terms of getting back to conference finals and things like that. And meanwhile, we look at plenty of franchises, including the one that we root for, that has now been to the second round of the playoffs twice in 24 years. And we hope it's on the way up now, but hasn't been to a conference finals in 25 years. But But these great franchises, these are what are considered down years from them. So I thought it was very interesting to cover. It's probably the most we'll ever talk about Nick Van Exel and Cedric Ceballos. But
unless we get a random team.
If we get one of these teams.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I really enjoyed this.
Definitely. Well, we'll have to do another one of these before too long. But until that time, or until our next episode, thank you all for listening as always. And I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.